NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Learn how penetration testing reduces risk, but only if you actually act on the results. We'll talk about all that and more with Core Security, a help systems company. Register for all of our webcasts and upcoming virtual training by visiting securityweekly.com/webcasts. You can access our on-demand library of previously recorded webcasts and training by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. This just in, InfoSec World 2020, June 22nd through the 24th, is now a fully virtual event. Security Weekly listeners will still receive 15% off the InfoSec World main conference or World Pass. You can visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020 and click the register button with our discount code. Now we have lots of stories to talk about. I don't know, many of mine weren't stories, but just like cool stuff I ran across this week.
It's your show, Paul.
Yeah, curious where you guys would like to start.
News articles, whatever.
News articles.
I had one that I thought would be interesting. In my news, I split them into COVID stories and another news. But there's several that caught my attention, but one that kind of got me is the UPS and CVS starting to deliver prescriptions by drone. And I was
just going to start with that one.
Yeah, I thought that would be we'd have fun talking about that because it's like both practicality and security in one story. I think delivering by drone is cool, but what could go wrong?
I've always, in this story, reminds me of something that's like always in the back of my mind when we look at criminals that haven't necessarily embodied or used cyber means, right? And this, happens in my neighborhood usually once or twice a year, where people will, in 2:30 in the morning, middle of the night, come through all the cars in all the driveways in the neighborhood. Those that are unlocked will rummage through and steal anything of value, right? Now, the mitigation to this is really to just lock your doors, right? And it's kind of funny. That's what the police told me when it happened to me once, because I forgot to lock my door. And they stole like a 10-year-old GPS, and I was like, okay, like whatever, that sucks. But and he's like, really just lock your doors, and that seems to thwart the attacker. And that was one of the very real instances. And Tyler, you've got a personal experience with this recently too, right? That made me think about, well, what happens when they start using some of the, not even so much cyber, right, but start getting into hacking electronics, which I guess we'll lump into cyber in this case, where they can now, as we know, hack key fobs, right? As we know, if they want to gain access to my house, they don't want to break a window, they can maybe look at Zigbee and Z-Wave and Bluetooth and perhaps bypass the protections. Now, one thing that has changed that's interesting with these physical attacks, because I can see people trying to reroute drones to drop the drugs in my backyard rather than my neighbor 10 miles away, just to put it in the context of this story. But when this attack happened recently, in fact, this week, right, it was reported. Now, I know about it because it was reported not just from insurance companies. Someone who works for an insurance company says, hey, there's an alert. People are filing claims that this happened. Like, I already knew it happened because people went on Ring and started entering in and put in all the videos of people doing it, right? And so now they're on camera, but the thing is you can't see the license plate and you can't see the person's face. So, Tyler, I want to throw it over to you because I don't know how much you want to share about what happened to you personally, but this is a problem, I think.
It really is, and I think one of the big frustrations from at least a technical standpoint is if you have stuff in place that you're expecting to do something for you, aka like a ring or blink, or, in my case, I have like 15 cameras placed all around. The fact that I had stuff stolen and I was not able to identify anything, didn't have an alert, like it didn't hit my zone, like got pretty good coverage. I do this pretty frequently. That's frustrating in and of itself. But people, the general consumer thinks, hey, I've got a ring. I'm going to see everything that happens at my house now and, have a face. That's not the case. And it's being sold that way as security devices. And these security devices, like heaven forbid if the unintelligent criminals start to be able to do some of the technical attacks because A, they're unintelligent and they're not going to utilize this smart, and B, like if they can figure out how to do some of this, it's going to be a bad day because most of this stuff is garbage anyway. So from a technical standpoint, I'm really pissed off at like all the cameras and I'm redoing the whole system, honestly. And B, I think the more technical we get, and from my standpoint, I'm going to use all the tech I can find, looking at security cams, looking at wireless signals in the area for some wireless gear that got stolen, certain footprints for things. Like you bring the whole gamut of like your technology and analytical thinking and start hunting these people. Hopefully we can hunt and like weed out this general common criminal. But when we start to talk about large scale things, like I think Ring's a great example, but we got these drones as a potential. If this happens wide scale, you're going to have these kind of attacks, and people are going to learn how to hack these or avoid detection on them. They're going to see that Ring doesn't have quality to do anything. So you're not mitigating anything. Again, you're back to the same place you were, except you're paying a company for subscription fees. So I don't know. I'm really frustrated with where we're at in a state of awesome tech that does not hit the general consumer and does not help even people that do this right.
Right. I mean, there's other mitigations, not all as practical, right? I mean, there is the camera. I've always wanted a camera.
There's a gun on a turret.
There's a gun on a turret. I can go adopt some pit bulls or other, large breeds that will attack people and put them in the car. I don't know if that's necessarily fair to the dog necessarily, and when you're going to make you can't have a dog in your cars every night. But I also like the camera. My best solution is to have a camera inside my car, right, that's not facing out the windshield, but is turned inside the windshield and somewhat hidden and only activated like when I set the alarm or lock the door. Or maybe, I don't know, if it's not moving and it's at night, when someone opens the door, that camera's activated, right? I mean, to me, that's a really great technical solution to at least being able to observe the attacker, right?
Yeah, for the car manufacturers listening, and you'd like to, pitch in on a great startup tech idea that could really take off. I think this is a fantastic idea. Why are there not just general little cameras that have an SD card that you can pull once the car is turned on and look at on your phone app? Like, what could go wrong there?
Yeah, right.
Nothing.
But then there's the interception technology. Like, what happens when? I mean, most of my cameras, admittedly, and Tyler and others, I don't know where you fall on this, right? But most of them are Wi-Fi. Just be able to get them in a physical area, they have to be Wi-Fi. I do have ones that are, PoE and wired. But what happens when attackers are using a Wi-Fi jammer, right? I mean, we know how to do that.
To get power to them, right? Like
yes.
The other problem is to
batteries.
Get good angles to get coverage. You got power, you got batteries, and the ones that do support batteries and power or are on a cloud-based subscription, again, you're back to quality and bandwidth and the ability to do anything great with footage that you do get. So.
Yep. And the batteries don't last as long in the cold either.
Well, I had a friend who was trying solar-powered cameras up in the Seattle area, and there wasn't enough daylight in the winter to keep the cameras online.
Yep.
They worked in the summer beautifully, except for the Wi-Fi risk, but they were online.
And it's not just prescriptions. Packages are being delivered now with drones. Like, we all kind of laughed at that when Amazon pulled the patent, but, like, that's a thing now.
Which is crazy how fast that happened.
What's that?
I'm trying to figure out how the drone traffic is more effective than the clockwise all right turn routing of a truck that's got like many times the packages in it than a drone can carry. And that's probably me not being very educated. I love the idea of it, aside from the security thing. I think it's really cool technically, but I'm wondering where the practicality line is.
Yeah, I think in fairly well-populated areas, Lee, you've got a point. I think Amazon's done really well creating their own delivery service. and being effective, especially in denser populated areas. I think drones are probably effective delivery for more sparsely populated areas, right? The Idaho and South Dakotas of the world, right? That probably is more efficient to fly a drone out than maybe to load up a truck and drive.
And you could send a drone through a traffic jam, no problem, because you're not driving, or out to like somewhere that's unsafe to send a delivery person through. I mean, I'm totally good with that. That's the old automaton versus a human argument. Like I said, it's the where does it work? And I'm sure there's some papers I could find that would explain it to me. But that was the other part of it. I'm thinking, how could you hack it? But then what's the actual usage model? If it could make the deliveries more efficient securely, well, hell, let's try it. Why not?
I mean, there also, I think the other thing too with a drone that is difficult to replicate is, what if you've got that really long driveway and you've got a drop box at the end of your driveway for delivery services, and in the delivery instructions you put the code for the lock, right? So they unlock it, they put the package in, and they lock it not that a lock's going to stop most of us, right? It may stop other criminals to a certain degree, barring bolt cutters or whatever. But it kind of eliminates how does a drone or makes it very difficult for a drone to drop a package in a secure location on your facility.
Yeah, I think one of the real scary pieces from a security standpoint of this, though, that people may not even be considering is the fact that while these drones are flying, they are also collecting telemetry, they're also collecting video feed, they're also taking photos. Like, I think the drone flying to deliver packages, maybe we'll call it 10% of what that drone is actually slated to do, and where they're actually going to make their cost savings, right? Like if they're grabbing new telemetry data for maps, or they're taking new, instead of satellite photos, they're doing minor updates on those images via the drone feeds. And then what is that collecting, and where are those the raw feeds of people's houses, people's yards, people's private property? Where are those live feeds being stored and saved, and how are those going to be aggregated?
Long gone are the days of nude sunbathing in your backyard. It's out the window now. Drone's going to fly overhead, and cat's out of the bag.
Damn it. I was looking forward to that. Don't want to scare our viewers. Sorry.
But also the interception of like how are those feeds and that telemetry data, and like are they collecting Wi-Fi cell data, those images, like are those all being fed over a CDMA channel, some kind of a LTE? Is that cached on the local drone? What happens if the drone is like intercepted or goes down? Like can those images and that data be pulled off? Like there's a lot of security things here that I think, as quick as this was deployed and as widespread as this is starting to get, that maybe weren't considered in the long or security ramification terms.
Changing gears, I want to go to some of the bad advice that you get on the internet, and I saw some of it this week. Two instances really jump out at me. First, there was an article on Medium, how to encrypt AWS RDS MySQL replicas with zero downtime and zero data loss. I don't want to. I mean, I'm somewhat challenging the design outlaid in this article because I'm not 100% sure. I won't necessarily throw the challenge out there as official, but one of the things recommended is to allow the MySQL port from 0.0.0.0 and open your database to the internet. And I kind of stopped right there. I had to catch my breath. And was like, I don't know off the top of my head that there's a better way to do this in AWS, but I got to imagine that there is, right? If you do want an encrypted database to be replicated across VPCs and across regions, regions would be fine in the same VPC. There's a way to do this without grossly violating security practices this just should not be the case.
At least the article pointed out that it is a security risk and you should do it at your own risk.
Yes, they did. But I think it could be skipped over or lost. I just think it's bad form to make this recommendation. Like if this is in fact your solution for this, maybe not put it in the article. Like it shouldn't be something that people even consider because it's just bad. It's just bad practice. And I truly believe, having done some stuff with RDS and AWS, like there are better solutions, for this in AWS that you can have. Maybe I'm wrong, but when I read the documentation, now I didn't have to have the level of availability and encryption in our applications, right, to actually have multiple databases like replicated across. If you do, I gotta imagine there's better. I can't imagine that, larger enterprises using AWS are doing things like this, right? I guess is my other point. So, bad advice, in my opinion. The other thing was, where was it now? Good Lord, I had a lot of stories. I put this in the Slack channel earlier. Hold on. No, that's not it. What was it? I put it in the Slack channel too. Oh, it was something with containers. And it's something that I'm have taken as kind of homework to research, right? Containers are obviously just take advantage of Linux primitives, I should say. And there's like 3 things that you can do to tune the security of your containers. Let's see if I get this right. There's Linux capabilities, there's app armor, and there's seccomp. And the article was from Medium and talked about how they did some performance testing when they basically removed each of those 3 different security controls and found that using seccomp unrestricted, I believe is the value for the parameter, gave you a significant performance boost. And seccomp, from what I understand, limits the system calls. There's one way to limit system calls that can happen within a container and its access to the kernel. And so by basically taking off those restrictions, they did some testing with Python and found that they saw a significant performance boost. Now, it's another article very similar, right, that says, hey, you shouldn't, this is a trade-off between security and performance. Maybe you shouldn't do it. They found that when they tested app armor and Linux capabilities, that there was no performance boost when you disabled those entirely. So, like, my question for the container ninjas is, from a security perspective, how much do each of those 3 things matter, and what is the guidance for tuning those for your containers? Privileged containers aside, which, as I understand it from my reading this week, is yet a 4th different type of restriction. Well, it's basically an on or off. Either it's a privileged container or not, which I believe one of the things it does is bypass all of those other controls. But I'd love to get, container gurus to kind of weigh in on some of that advice. This also, I found, right, plays into Kubernetes as well, because Kubernetes is, in some respects, only as secure as the containers you're building into them and their profiles that they're running in. So I saw some articles that were applying some of this to Kubernetes as well. So it was really interesting. I haven't done the full analysis, just some cursory reading, basically.
Oh, I want to take this and give it to some of my container guys and say, hey, guys, what do you think? Because, I mean, that we've been talking about trade-offs between container security and performance, and what can we do? And I just think it'd be interesting to see what they thought if they've messed with any of this. And they're doing Linux-based containers, but still, I'm kind of thinking, wow, this would be really cool.
Yeah, I think it would make for a great, like a webcast or training and stuff to at least incorporate aspects of this, because there's some really deep Linux stuff that most certainly applies to containers and how it applies. And for me, the larger questions are like, okay, in a production application, when I have, these requirements, what should I take into consideration when I start building my profiles, right? There's obviously a lot of options here, and some may be applicable to my situation or not, and others may have a completely different experience and different requirements, right? So
that's kind of the big thing that you end up running into, and having just got done doing some major tests against a lot of containerized and full cloud companies and solutions. Like when you go prod and you start to see how this has to be, and you end up talking with When it's all said and done and working through some of the security implications, you realize why they have to do certain things from a production standpoint. And there's not a ton of great advice out there to even offer when you're having to consider single sign-on SAML, or you're having to consider the integration of both customer single sign-on and API access, as well as your development pipelines and where the developers need access. At some point, keys have to be exchanged, connections have to be made, and variables and code has to be allowed to push and pull information.
System calls have to be made, and which ones need to be made and which ones don't based on what I'm building into my app. I have to imagine, and I don't know for sure, that there are probably commercial applications that will profile that and make adjustments to the policy as need be. I want to say stuff is hinted towards that. I don't want to say for sure, but I got to imagine that that's at least a feature request or something commercial vendors are thinking about, right, when applying controls to a containerized environment. I'm sure there's people listening that work for vendors that have those features that are jumping up and down. And by all means, contact us because we want to know about that stuff. It's awesome.
We could almost do a whole podcast on container security and what kind of advice is and isn't out there. I'm just excited by the container that really comes back to purpose-built stuff and getting it secure. It's kind of really, it's a throwback and exciting to me, and I'd love to see it keep going.
A lot of nuances in there too.
Oh yeah, it's completely trivial.
Let's see. Any other stories that pique your interest? While we're on containers, Labtainers was something I found in my research. This is a complete cybersecurity lab built on containers. It's based on a paper from 2017. Certainly nothing new. However, when I looked into it recently, they are keeping it up to date. And basically, they've made it very much like an educational lab, not just kind of a lab where like, oh, hey, you put it up and do with it what you might. It is a very structured lab intended for a classroom environment to teach people cybersecurity. I didn't like spin it up on my own and start doing some of the exercises. I do want to, but I did look at the tools and everything else that they are making available. And it was a pretty exhaustive list of labs that range from network tools to web app tools. I mean, it was a huge list of stuff. So it's pretty comprehensive. And I think something to definitely check out.
Oh, I'm thinking, I know some teachers, some professors in cyber at one of our local colleges that would just love this stuff. I mean, they're always looking for stuff for the students to work on. This is cool.
Yeah, and it's all free.
Looks free.
Yeah, and all the research is there
for free.
All of the an
I can only do that once a day.
I mean, there's like a guide for the students, guide for the teachers, the whole instructions on how to set. It's very well documented, and I thought very well presented. So. I guess while we're on the container thing, also I came across Rhino Security Lab CCAT, which is a cloud container attack tool. They describe one of the kind of attack scenarios as they compromise AWS credentials, they enumerate and explore the ECR repositories, they found a Docker image, you get that from ECR, you backdoor that image, and you put it back in the repository as one of the tutorials, so it's a whole attack tool set for that, which I thought was pretty cool. Did we lose Tyler's video? I saw his camera battery going like from 5, 4, 3, and then it was finally on 0, and now we can't see him. So I don't.
Yep. He said he was fine.
I thought it was fine.
Well, you thought wrong.
His audio is still there at least. Don't go anywhere, Tyler. We need you for the next segment too. So.
Oh, I'm right here.
Alrighty. We just can't see you.
Lee had a couple stories from concerning my alma mater.
Yes, I did. I was just firing off to my buddy at Northwestern Nazarene that story of Paul's because I was going to forget otherwise. But there was two. One of which I thank Tyler for about the selecting and safely using collaboration tools, a chart they did evaluating things like Slack versus WebEx versus
et cetera, et cetera. Really cool reference that looks at them. They've done a lot of research on the security features and how they compare against each other, which, it looks to me like it's intended to help make users make good choices for using the collaboration tools that are out there. So it's not just about doing a Zoom versus a WebEx. It's also things like Signal are in there and WhatsApp. So you really can see the different security levels. My bias, because of where I work, is not everybody's really super aware of outside of the level of protection of the information they want to share across the internet. And now that we're doing it from home, we don't have all our corporate controls in the same way. So I thought that was a pretty cool reference.
Yeah, and I like these studies that compare products that don't come out and, let's say draw quadrants and put folks in like the best part of the quadrant, or say that this product is the best in terms of a security solution or the best in security, right? Security is very much tailored to each organization, as are your requirements. And having data that allows me to make a decision that helps me evaluate, I think is where we need to be. I think that, studies that point to this is the best solution are full of crap. I mean, really, who can recommend the best solution for everything? It's all about people's individual requirements. Functional requirements and security requirements, right, are different for everyone. So
I just think people should know what's out there and make a risk-based decision, an informed decision, excuse me.
Yeah.
Know what they have. And then I'd rather make an informed decision, right or wrong, than just kind of sticking a dart in a target.
Right.
The other one is the NSA and the Australian Signals Director, and I'm having trouble saying that, talking about common web shells used against web-facing servers and stuff, which is, I thought, kind of interesting. Excuse me.
I think we talked about this one last week, Lee.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I thought it was a good one, though. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, I'm getting a lot of COVID-related emails about what's going on, and so finding an interesting story that's not COVID is kind of, I'm gravitating to them right now. That's just me.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's why also I pulled some of my stories. I was just flagging on things I was researching this week, right? Rather than news, because it is so heavily swayed in the COVID-19 front.
Well, I've taken to just deleting them. If I get lots of emails, especially since I have media. I'm on media mailing lists because I get in free to conferences for free.
Right there.
But I delete the COVID-19 ones. But I'm wondering if we're being responsible, we don't need to dwell on it because I'm tired of getting the emails. Would you like to talk to our expert about COVID-19? I'm like, no. But maybe we should, especially given our first interview and the props we got from Phil. Maybe we should try to find one or two meaningful COVID-19 related type articles a week and talk about them.
Agreed.
Right. Well, I mean, the drone story came out of my COVID pile.
Yeah, so we covered
but
one.
Really, I thought drone security was something beyond COVID, and I think everybody would enjoy that. I'm trying to separate them so people understand that, here's COVID-specific stuff. And they read them or not, it's all good. Just trying
all
to
right,
share.
Tag, you're it, Lee. You're in charge. You do the COVID-19
section. Thank you. I will.
All right.
So what about, did anybody see that article or other articles talking about tracking for COVID? People putting tracking applications on their phones. I mean, the hair on the back of my neck crawls when I read that.
Also discussed last week, I think, or at least I put some stories up.
Well, there were several of them. This was one of the study I saw that 3 out of 5 Americans would say, no. I thought that was cool. It was a Washington Post study, which is why I captured it, because it's like not I'm going to go do it and help the research, but no, I'd rather not. I mean, and I'm in the I'd rather not category personally. I'll admit my bias.
There should be some interesting research coming out about that in the next few weeks. So definitely keep an eye out for some of that.
Hurry up,
that
Tyler.
is definitely a big concern. It's a big deal. There's a lot of platforms that are looking into it and tracking this. There's a lot of even a lot of government entities that are tracking and looking at this particular stuff. So research is happening, and it is very, very real. So from a security standpoint, it sounds scary as crap. Like from privacy, it's horrible. From an overall, like kind of the argument that people are making is, do you care about your privacy or do you want to be dead? And so at the end of the day, like to make this whole thing better and like for us to get, back on our feet quicker, this is something you give up. And if you look at history, this has kind of been, this is not new, right? It's always been a privacy and a crisis in which most of the freedoms and stuff have been handed over, or certain rights have been changed and not went back. So I think it is very, something that needs to be evaluated, and people really do need to be informed properly. So hopefully there's some good, solid information that comes out around it.
Well, Tyler, yes, our country has a long history and not a good one in that respect. So
I think one of the other trends that I find interesting related to COVID-19 is that as I talk to teachers at many different levels, right, a lot of this technology is new to them. The virtual learning technology in general is new to them. And it's funny when I hear them describe it, I was like, yeah, so like colleges and universities have been using this virtual classroom technology for a long time. I'm like, now that I think about it, when I evaluated the security of those systems, 15 plus years ago, it was pretty atrocious. And I can't imagine it's gotten much better. And now, much like what happened with Zoom, now they're seeing a huge uptick in adoption, which attracts all of the bad actors on the internet to take advantage of that. So it's very much my concern that not only the truly bad actors will take advantage of everyone using this new technology, as we do a lot more things remotely, likely for the foreseeable future in some capacity, especially in more recently, like this year, we're going to see a lot more of that truly bad actors will take advantage of it, which is concerning. But the pranksters, right, will also take advantage of that stuff as well. And we're going to deal with that on both fronts until we can effectively secure all of these platforms, or as many as we can, to prevent against it.
Well, but there's go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you guys to possibly revise my idea to, talk about a couple COVID articles a week. Do we want to include under the category of COVID-19 or pandemic-related stories, stories about the use of technology? I mean, I was like, do we want to have Zoom story of the week because they seem to pop up continuously, or just fold that into COVID-19? Or maybe our COVID-19 coverage is more focused on the technical implementations that are out there, the virtual conferencing and whatnot, virtual teaching.
I would take that on a case-by-case basis, Jeff. I think if there's stuff newsworthy, certainly with Zoom. One of the things that I flagged because it kind of sort of relates to COVID-19, right, is now that we're all communicating basically more so over the internet and digital means than if, hey, like when, Jeff is here, I can have that private, I guess, air quotes, private conversation that's not digital, right? But, for example, with Jeff not being here, we may have to find other means to do that. I've not used Keybase. Has anyone used Keybase? End-to-end encryption messaging system?
Yeah.
And it did have a vulnerability, but in my assessment, and I want you folks to weigh in, obviously, they seem to take security really seriously at Keybase.
Yeah, they do.
And responded.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah. And in fact, I think the exploit that I saw, the response from Keybase was, yeah, we actually saw this already, and the fix is in the next release, like already. So I thought that was pretty cool. And a solution I don't know if Jake gets the blessing from the rest of the hosts, a solution you may consider for private communications.
No, I
Keybase
think
is pretty good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Keybase is pretty good. The adoption outside of the community, the security community anyway, is much lower, obviously. So you run into that, like ease of use and familiarity for like terminology and the app itself and kind of usability. I wouldn't put them kind of at like the Signal level. Like Signal, you could replace your text messaging app with, right? And it's going to look the same. A lot of the terminology and adoption for Keybase is geared around security. So there's that.
Gotcha. Let's see.
So I have a question. It's probably mostly for Tyler, if he can even answer it. Other than nation state, including perhaps the U.S., capturing all cellular mobile communications, how easy or hard is it for an individual attacker to go after a specific individual that may or may not be using an encrypted text message? To me, there's a big difference between targeting an individual and just you're on the internet doing all your magical, fun hacking things, and you just discover communications and find something juicy. If someone was to be targeted, how hard is it to actually intercept, let's say, cellular mobile communications these days?
Tyler, while you think about that, I'll take the low-hanging fruit. In my
Okay.
kind of guess and theory is that if you're an Apple iOS user and you've got iMessage, that likely the vector is password spraying and then setting up a device to receive all those iMessages and intercepting communications. Like if I were tasked with it, that's where I'd start. If I were going to target an individual, to be able to do that, because I don't know if you've ever had iOS devices, right? Even if it's an older one, all of a sudden you get a new message and it dings on all of them, right? And Apple's done that kind of under the covers, like not really, haven't promoted that over the years, but is very, very much a feature and something I was happy to get away from when I left the Apple kind of ecosystem.
Oh, on top of that, the messages are AES 256 encrypted in transit, so going after the password so you get more devices on your account is the way to do it.
Yeah, I think really looking at what your threat risk profile is, like you said, not nation state, right? If you're just talking about someone targeting you on the internet, the general education level.
The lights go off?
Yes. See what happens when I start talking about this stuff.
I like how Johnny put the lower third.
China is after.
We're still live. We're still. Someone's still. Yeah.
Tyler has been redacted. There he is.
The general education level needed to intercept cellular traffic or look at like the S7 traffic or get on the back-end systems and intercept those particular pieces and decrypt them. And they're not going to be going after the interception or the encryption piece, right? They're going to be on your device on an app that has too many permissions, whether that's in iOS or Android, and that app has the capability to read or write to or read particular applications or stores. There's some applications in like the host OS that does a better job of encrypting that stuff and segmenting it or sandboxing it. But overall, as attackers or people that you're targeting, when you're targeting them, you're going to be utilizing their applications. You're going to be using password stuffing. You're going to be using links sent to them to maybe get an IP address so you can profile their email, profile their phone, and then begin a full-scale kind of targeting thing. And overall, that's usually never in the encryption. Like if you're going to be breaking encryption and you're going to be doing it at that level, then you're either working for a company that is selling this probably to a solution or a government, or you are a nation state and that's kind of your job. You're a crypto guy. So.
Well, I was looking for not even that detail, but just like if you, Tyler, wanted to go after, John Smith that works for the Acme Corporation in Dubuque, Iowa, and you've got his you've got an email address and a mobile phone, how hard is it to actually, other than sending him things that you're hoping he'll respond to, some sort of phishing attack, how hard is it to find his signal in the ether?
It's not overly difficult. There's enough tracking built into a lot of the applications and platforms, and we've talked about ad tracking stuff and your your cellular phone and your OS connecting to wireless, not even connecting, but beaconing wireless next to you, provides a pretty decent ability to track. That is a kind of a specific niche, and there's specific companies that have developed things around that, and those are few and far between. So I would say anybody and their job, like someone trying to get into this and do it themselves, probably not, because the data sets and the access to some of this data is a little more restricted than that, but it's not impossible. So I don't think the risk is really there for what people really complain about for security. Like at the end of the day, like the fact that Zoom didn't have end-to-end encryption, let me know how you're going to get in the middle of that and build a good attack around that particular application right out the gate from remotely, and then we can talk business. I think that's kind of ridiculous. There's better things to think about, like making sure that there's a default randomized password on all the meetings, or making sure that each of these users are leveraging some kind of a single sign-on that's been verified or authorized. Like those seem like much bigger security concerns over a problem with encryption.
Well, one of the things I've been running into, Tyler, is the repeated theme of somebody publishes a bogus app that does more than it should, that's over permissioned, whatever. Is that really a necessary tool for doing what we're describing, or is that just sort of extra noise in the system?
That's usually one into like the means, right? Like that's a pretty easy way to do it on the masses. If you're trying to target very, very specific people, that becomes a little bit more difficult. You've got to profile the person. You've got to then either pay for ads and kind of have that application get sent to them in some way that's meaningful that they may install it. You may have some phishing or social engineering attacks that you're going to leverage to send them information around maybe certain apps that you've built to do that, and trying to get them to download that from an alternate source or even from the Google store. Having those particular pieces in place for a very targeted attack is much more difficult. If we're just talking about mass people are always going to download something. If you make some quippy game, you make some cat on the internet meme app theme, like it's going to do the things that people are going to download and use, and so therefore you're going to get a lot of devices as part of your botnet or as part of like PII gathering. Like what is the actual purpose, and who is the threat actor doing this, and for what gain? Those are the kind of the questions you ask when you start to look at those apps. But those apps are out there, and they do get pushed out. And from a nefarious standpoint, and from a malicious attacker, like actually turning that app into capital or into a monetary value is where it starts to break down. And I think that's kind of at the end of the day, attackers are capitalists. They're out there making money on this. That's the whole goal. So how are they doing that? And is there a stopgap that we can put in between, where they're monetizing these particular pieces and what's the end game to them?
So if I want to do something broadscape where I just need Joe Random, maybe want to build a botnet or maybe some indiscriminate crypto mining, the over-permission scammy app will work. But if I want to get Mr. Man, I've got to be a lot more focused and work a lot harder. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right. And there's a lot easier ways to do that, frankly, honestly, with like everything being public on the internet. Even if you're a fairly private person, again, almost everybody has some kind of a phone. Everybody's tied to some kind of a utility bill that is tied to an address. That address is, been in some kind of a data breach somewhere. This data, as these data breaches are becoming, data sets and being leveraged by attackers, you're pretty hard set to hide on the internet anymore. Like unless you're Michael Bazell and you've taken the time to actually strip all that out of all of these databases, and assuming that none of the ones that you are in, such as the credit ones, right? Like you have to have a real name, you have to file taxes, you have to be part of the credit system. It becomes very difficult in today's digital age to actually do that or do it well.
One thing that helps in hiding that I found kind of like pretty funny, actually, and it's nothing novel, but the researchers kind of uncovered the use of Recaptcha by attackers to hide their phishing pages.
Yep. So
the bots don't snag your phishing page. You put a CAPTCHA on it because it doesn't just protect against malicious bots; it can protect against all bots. So I thought that was kind of a classic case, right, of using defensive tools for offensive means, or vice versa. Goes the other way too. But a tool has multiple uses, and Google's Recaptcha certainly helps the attackers, but helps the defenders too.
It's not the first. That's not the first time we've seen that. And that, like, these tools are commonly and often multi-purposefully used for attackers. Things like CloudFront, right? Like, we've seen a huge uptick in CloudFront for C2. Like, if you can have your C2 call out to all these domains that sit behind CloudFront and get it redirected to you, that hides your traffic better. Things like the Recaptcha, that's a great one. Even Nginx or redirectors, that's what a lot of the C2 uses. Right. You put stuff in front of you and make sure that the requests are what you want to see, so you don't get flagged or fingerprinted. Oh,
and using Amazon's API gateway to hide your IP addresses is another great way that I'm like, attackers are going to be doing this too, right?
Oh, they already are. Like that Lambda function spinning up, hundreds of IPs and running scans against a WAF so that you don't get blacklisted. Like, there's lots of tools out there to do this. They've been doing this.
Which is ironically the reason why you want to implement a CAPTCHA on your own site is to help that. But then the attacker can just go to those other services that are having real people fill out the CAPTCHA and passing the results back to you in an API. If most of those are paid for, from what my research gathered. So as an attacker, you've got to be making some money, and if the juice is worth the squeeze, you're going to pay someone to access their service to have people bypass your CAPTCHAs. So it's all a cat and mouse game.
Yeah, I wanted to just sort of highlight something that Tyler said a moment ago, and this kind of ties back to our first interview with Jeremy and Phil. Most of the bad guys out there today are in it for the money, and they do the stuff that's relatively easy and simple because it works, and they make a living off it because there's so many people out there that aren't doing some of the basic things, and we talk about all the time. But they're not typically targeting anybody specifically. I mean, even like, not to play on words, but the target breach. Egregious breach, millions lost of credit card numbers, but the bad guys, they weren't going after Target. They just happened to find Target was vulnerable to something that they could exploit. And I think that's a key difference between, cybersecurity and sort of the national security, Department of Homeland Security mission protecting the nation state, where we're being targeted and specific entities and organizations within the country may be targeted for that purpose. And simply the group of bad guys out there that are just trying to make a buck. Now, what gets interesting is when the group of bad guys are out there trying to make a buck and they happen to work for a nation state because they're funding efforts. Yeah, it's a little bit dicey.
But I mean, the lines get blurry, and I don't think we should make assumptions about who should, apply security to your organization, right? Because you could be a small business largely preyed upon by the opportunistic attacker, except now you started doing business with this other company that is a target for whatever reason, and now you're a target by association, so you will be targeted, right?
That's the hard thing, is you never know where you sit in the chain of attacks. In order to get to a certain place, you may be the means to an objective, and whether you are the direct means or the indirect means, you may be the one sole idea that the hacker had in order to go after and get to the next step in their target. So yeah, they may be targeting you, but hackers are often they're opportunistic. They're going to leverage those things. They may be looking at their local DMV and having to renew their license, and most of us browse the web with burp open and happen to look at source code as we're doing stuff because we're bored. I'm sure everybody does that. And, they see something and it happens to just be an egregious hole. So they use that, and then all of a sudden now you've got access to lots and lots of jail records or videos, and that becomes something that makes the news. So again, whether you're opportunistic or not, it doesn't really change the gravity of what ends up happening once they do get access, or knowing whether or not you are in that chain. So you better be secure.
I think there's also the kind of nation-state attackers that are looking for disruption, right? It's not necessarily that they're targeting your organization because you are your organization and you have this specific data, but they're targeting you because you are an organization that falls in that category that they can hack and cause disruption. You are a state and local government, And if you're vulnerable, we're going to ransomware you. And it's been very clear, at least in my assessment, that not all of the attackers that are ransomwaring state and local governments really care about collecting a ransom. I mean, we covered it last year, right? And even some of this year, that, you know, you try and bargain with them and be like, hey, instead of $1 million, let me give you $300,000, right? And they're like, no. That tells me that it's not so much about the payout, it's about making a statement or a point and or causing disruption in a nation, in an enemy nation state country, right?
Yep.
It's well, one final thought, if I may.
Sure.
It's tricky because, you know, my DoD training on what the threats are, which is what we're talking about in terms of nation states, attackers. We talk about motivations, and the motivations I don't think have changed over the years. I think maybe, you know, who's doing more and who's, you know, more successful, as it were, has somehow changed. But, you know, motivations like, you know, nation state versus nation state, but there's always, you know, there's a reason why countries fight, whether it's a virtual war, you know, conventional war, cyber war,
Religion,
you know, there's religious aspects there. It's largely tied to economics. I mean, World War II was largely, especially in the Pacific theater, was largely fought over you know, natural resources. In a lot of wars, you know, in the old days it was just simply land grabbing, but land grabbing leads to, we have more land to, you know, do agriculture in the old days, but then this land has oil, this land has coal, this land has, you know, mineral wealth and that type of thing. What I'm puzzled about, and maybe that report that Phil mentioned, maybe it touches on it. Disruption for the sake of disruption was not a motivation for the threat actors or threats as I learned it back in the day. And so I'm just scratching my head trying to figure out, okay, so you're disrupting for what purpose?
Yeah.
You know, why? Why would you disrupt?
Politically motivated nation state enemy. I mean, this week we saw an Israeli pipeline was attacked, right? I thought I had that story in there. I knowing many folks from Israel and loving them as much as I do, I know that whoever did that is probably going to be in a world of hurt, and I would not want to be the perpetrator of those attacks. Certainly,
don't want to mess with Mossad.
But I think they caught it in time, right? Was that what I read in the article? And I briefly skimmed it, right? Like it had gotten to a certain stage, and they did catch them, which is not surprising. You know, for
and it
a
makes you
country
wonder
like
what they aren't releasing, because if that's what they're releasing,
yeah,
and that's what they're saying out in the public, you know, that obviously means something that's unsaid.
And it makes you wonder the skill level of those perpetrators to even make it that far into Israel's industrial control systems. Had to be leveraging some serious resources, right? Which, I mean, can segue into how zero-day exploits are bought, sold, and traded today, which I feel like is a practice that has just exploded, and a lot of it on above bar and a lot of it below bar as well. And just it'd be interesting to have a segment and talk about the zero-day exploit trade today, because so many events over the past 20 years have really shaped that, and I'm curious as to where it falls today.
I'd be really interested if someone would correlate the use of large-scale breaches or large-scale attacks that have made the news, or maybe not even made the news, and what percentage of them or what part of the attacks actually leveraged a zero-day versus there was a misconfiguration, a phish, some kind of a in through a vendor, something like that. I'd be curious what that actually looks like from a compiled data resource analytic standpoint.
Right. And I wonder where they come from too. Like, are there nation states that develop them internally versus that percentage versus they've acquired it through some other means, and like how many hands have passed through it, or how many of like VUPEN organizations have sold it to multiple nation states, and what's the lifetime? I think there's some really interesting kind of statistics surrounding zero-day exploits. I did want to cover one last article before we take a break. 9 skills that separate beginners from intermediate Python programmers. This can apply to really many of these can apply to most languages. What I thought was most interesting was they say, as a beginner, you might work for days on a small snippet of code. If that code suddenly works, you feel a sense of release and run over to the next part of the code. It's one of the worst things you can do. Accepting that it works without understanding why is more dangerous than not understanding why the code doesn't run. I thought this was a very prolific statement from this article that has some very, very serious ties to security, right? Because I think there's a lot of times where security vulnerabilities are uncovered is because a software developer got it running, doesn't quite understand why. And if you don't understand why it's running, first of all, you don't understand how to troubleshoot it when it breaks. Second of all, how are you going to understand how a security vulnerability could even be there, let alone its impact on the system?
Well, that's not just a programming thing.
No,
I mean,
certainly not.
I remember, gosh, one of my first private sector companies hired us to do a pen test of their recently attached to the internet. They'd bought a here's a the Wayback Machine for you. They'd bought a Gauntlet firewall.
Ooh. And
they'd gone and done the training, and they thought that they'd done a pretty good job setting it up, and they wanted us to try to break, see what they looked like from the internet. And we're doing some initial, I think maybe Nmap was out by then, so we're just doing initial port scanning, and we're like, there's a firewall there? Because we were like mapping their entire network. And long story short, at the end of the day, when we looked at their firewall rules, last rule was IP any allow.
There you go.
And the conclusion that we drew, because nobody, of course, claimed ownership for that, but like somebody put that in there and it made something work.
Yep.
And so they didn't
Great
question
point,
and they moved on.
Absolutely. And that article did come from Medium. I don't like to pick on Medium too much, but I thought that was a very good article. It's my story number 17 in the show notes. So.
Well, I'm having a distracted moment looking at it, to be honest with you.
Right.
It's kind of like an old squirrel. This is really cool.
Well, and you just did some Python training, right? So they talk about enumerate, and I had never really, thought about that and this is a software, design and engineering thing, right? How elegant that was as compared to how we used to do it in other languages. So some things are some newfound appreciations for the way Python implements things. Other things are like bang my head against the wall. Why does Python do it that way as well, right? But there's some elegant things in there too that, as software developers or just casual programmers, you'll gain some knowledge from, and I think appreciation for some of the ways that, in this case, Python does things.
And I come from structured programming, not object-oriented, so object-oriented still, it's kind of this is smoke and mirrors to me, but it is really cool.
Python does a decent job of object-oriented. It's a little, I would describe it as loosey-goosey compared to Java and other more truly object-oriented languages, but it does a decent job.
Well, I still thought when I was installing a package in the mid-90s and the title of the software was Object-Oriented COBOL, my head was going to explode. Actually, it was in the 2000s. COBOL 2002 added object-oriented support. I'm not sure why.
Not all object-oriented is the same. It's not all made the same.
No, it's not.
And with that, we will take a short break, come back. We're going to have a discussion about things related to vulnerability management and a demo from Qualys on their VMDR, so stay tuned.